Emily Walker was driving home from work when she saw a small boy standing alone near the sidewalk. His clothes were dirty and his face was covered in tears. Something in her heart told her to stop. She pulled over, stepped out of her car, and gently approached him. "Hey there, are you lost?" she asked with a warm smile. The boy, who looked no older than 5, sniffled and nodded. "I can't find my mom," he said in a small voice. Emily's heart ached for him. It was getting dark, and no child should be alone on the streets at this hour. She knelt beside him and said, "Don't worry, I'll help you find your mom." She took out her phone and dialed 911 to report a lost child. As she waited for the call to connect, the boy suddenly grabbed her hand. "They're coming," he whispered, his wide eyes filled with fear. Before Emily could ask what he meant, the sound of sirens filled the air. Bright red and blue lights flashed as multiple police cars screeched to a halt around her. Officers jumped out, guns drawn, shouting, "Put your hands up!" Emily's heart pounded. What was happening? Why were they treating her like a criminal? Emily froze, her hands trembling in the air. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice shaky. The officers didn't answer right away. One of them, a tall man with stern eyes, stepped forward. "Step away from the boy," he commanded. Emily glanced at the child who clung to her leg, his tiny fingers digging into her jeans. "No! She's helping me!" the boy protested, but his voice was drowned out by the officers' shouts. Before Emily could explain, 2 officers rushed toward her. One grabbed her arms and pulled them behind her back. Cold metal cuffs snapped around her wrists. "You're under arrest for child abduction," the officer said. Emily's breath caught in her throat. "What? No! I was just helping him," she cried, struggling against their grip. The boy screamed, "She didn't take me. She was helping me." But the officers didn't listen. As Emily was pushed into the back of a police car, panic took over. How had everything gone so wrong in just a few minutes? Sitting in the police car, Emily's mind raced. This had to be some kind of mistake. She had only tried to help a lost child, and now she was being treated like a criminal. Through the car window, she saw the boy crying as an officer tried to question him. His little hands wiped away his tears as he pointed at Emily, trying to explain. But the officers weren't listening. Emily took a deep breath and turned to the officer sitting in the driver's seat. "Please, listen to me," she begged. "I just found him alone on the street. I was calling 911 to help him." The officer, a woman with short brown hair, studied Emily for a moment. "Stay quiet until we get to the station," she said firmly. Emily's heart sank. No one believed her. As the police car drove away, she stared out the window, feeling helpless. How could she prove she was innocent? At the station, Emily was led into a cold interrogation room. A bright light shone down on her, making the small room feel even more suffocating. Across from her, Detective Harris, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes, sat with a folder in front of him. "Emily Walker, do you know why you're here?" he asked. "Yes, but this is a misunderstanding," Emily said quickly. "I saw a lost boy on the street and stopped to help. I was calling 911 when the police showed up and arrested me." The detective didn't react. He opened the folder and pulled out a picture of the same little boy. "This child was reported missing earlier today. His mother says he was kidnapped from a park." Emily's stomach dropped. "No, I didn't take him. He was alone when I found him," she insisted. The detective folded his hands together. "Then why was he seen getting into your car?" he asked. Emily's blood turned to ice. That wasn't true. Was someone setting her up? Emily felt like she was drowning in confusion. How could they believe she had kidnapped the boy? She took a deep breath and said, "You have to let me talk to him. He'll tell you the truth." The detective narrowed his eyes, but didn't immediately refuse. After a long pause, he stood up and left the room. Minutes later, the door opened again and the little boy was led inside. His face lit up when he saw Emily. "You didn't take me! You helped me!" he blurted out before anyone could speak. Detective Harris raised an eyebrow. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said to the child. The boy sniffled and nodded. "I was at the park with my mom, but she was talking to someone on the phone. A man came and told me my mom was looking for me, so I followed him. But then he left me on the street and ran away." Emily's heart pounded. This meant the real kidnapper was still out there. The detective frowned, rubbing his chin. "If that's true, then why did someone call in a report saying you were the kidnapper?" Emily's mind raced. Someone wanted her to take the blame. But why? The interrogation room fell silent as the detective processed the boy's words. "Do you remember what the man looked like?" he asked. The boy nodded slowly. He had a big scar on his neck and wore a black hat. The detective's face darkened. He stood up and left the room without another word. Emily's heart pounded. Was he finally realizing she was innocent? After what felt like an eternity, the door opened again, and another officer entered. "We just checked the security footage from a nearby store," he said. "The boy's story checks out. He was taken by a man matching that description and later abandoned. But here's the problem. Our system flagged the description of the suspect. He's connected to something much bigger." Emily's stomach twisted. "Bigger? What do you mean?" The officer hesitated before answering. "The man who kidnapped the boy is part of a dangerous human trafficking ring, and you might be the only witness who can stop them." Emily's breath caught in her throat. A human trafficking ring? She had only wanted to help a lost child, but now she was caught in something much bigger. The officer watching her leaned in. "We need your help," he said. "If you saw the man who took the boy, you could be the key to stopping this operation." Emily swallowed hard. She wasn't a cop, just an ordinary woman who had stopped to help. But if she could prevent other children from being taken, could she really walk away? She thought about the little boy, his tear-streaked face, his tiny hands gripping her for safety. She couldn't let this happen to another child. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "Tell me what I need to do." Detective Harris returned, his face tense. "We have a plan," he said. "The man who kidnapped the boy was seen near an old warehouse outside of town. We think that's where they're keeping other children. We need to catch him before he disappears again." Emily's stomach churned. "And you want me to help?" she asked. Harris nodded. "He might recognize you. That could be our advantage. If we use you as bait, we can lure him out." Emily's hands trembled, but she clenched them into fists. She wasn't a hero, but if she could save even one child, she had to try. "Okay," she said. "Let's do it." Emily stood outside a small cafe near the warehouse, pretending to be on her phone. The police were watching from hidden locations, ready to move. She felt exposed, her skin crawling under the weight of unseen eyes. Then she saw him. A man in a black hat, his neck marked by a long scar, was walking toward her. Her heart pounded. He slowed as he passed, his sharp eyes locking onto hers. "Lost something?" he asked, his voice low and rough. Emily forced herself to stay calm. "Maybe," she said, trying to sound casual. The man smirked, taking the bait. "Come with me, I can help," he said. Emily hesitated just long enough for him to believe she was uncertain. Then she nodded and followed. The man led her down a narrow alley behind the cafe. Emily's pulse raced as she heard the soft footsteps of the undercover officers moving into position. The man turned suddenly, his hand gripping her wrist. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "You're making a mistake." Before she could react, a van screeched to a halt beside them. The doors flung open, and two men inside reached for her. Emily's scream barely left her throat before the alley exploded with action. Police officers rushed in from all sides, guns drawn. "Police! Get on the ground!" Harris shouted. The kidnappers tried to run, but they were outnumbered. Within seconds, they were tackled and handcuffed. Emily stumbled back, her whole body shaking. It was over. Inside the warehouse, officers found what they had feared. Several missing children locked in a back room. Some were crying, others too scared to speak. Emily's heart broke as she watched the officers gently carry them out, wrapping them in warm blankets. The little boy she had helped earlier spotted her and ran into her arms. "You saved me," he whispered. Tears filled her eyes. "No, sweetheart, you were so brave," she told him. Nearby, Detective Harris watched, nodding approvingly. "Because of you, we shut down an entire operation," he said. "These kids are going home." Relief washed over Emily. She had never expected to be a hero, but tonight she had made a difference. The next morning, Emily sat at home, sipping a cup of tea. She still couldn't believe what had happened. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the boy's mother. "Thank you for saving my son. I can never repay you." Emily smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. Later that day, Detective Harris called. "We could use people like you, Emily," he said. "Have you ever thought about working with us?" She laughed, shaking her head. "I'm just an ordinary woman," she said. But deep down, she knew she would never turn her back on someone in need. If life ever put her in that position again, she would be ready.